You're listening to The Hard Truth with John Deaton. John Deaton is a Marine veteran, lawyer, and best-selling author who stared down poverty, survived street violence, and beat cancer to fight another day. From the streets to the courtroom, Deaton has taken on corporate greed and fought against government fraud and overreach. Always for the little guy, a proud father of 3 girls, Deaton brings you the raw, unfiltered truth that hits hard and holds nothing back. Join us as we dive into his journey, his vision, and what he hopes to bring to the people of Massachusetts.
Don't touch the dial or change the channel because it's Sunday at 7 p.m. and you're listening to The Hard Truth on WRKO. Good evening, everyone. I'm John Deaton. I hope you had a great, blessed week. Every week, I end up saying, because it's the truth, that there's news to get to. There's never, ever anything not to talk about. So let's jump off. Big news yesterday, at least big news in the political arena, and that is Congressman Seth Moulton has officially launched his campaign to challenge Senator Ed Markey in the Democratic primary. So, Senator Moulton, in his announcement video, which I'll get to in a minute, I found it quite interesting. He says, obviously, some of the same things that I've been saying, right? He highlights the fact that Ed Markey will be 80 years old if he's reelected and fulfills a full term. He would be 86 years old in office. But more importantly, Ed Markey has been a part of the Washington swamp for 50 years. That's a half a century. Seth Moulton pointed out that Ed Markey's been in office longer than Seth Moulton has been alive. I've made that point quite a few times. I've told you that the average person in Massachusetts, we're just going to say the average voter in Massachusetts is 39.5. So we're going to round it up. Average voters, 40 years old in the Commonwealth. So not only is Ed Markey twice the age of the average voter, he's been in Washington for a decade longer than the average person has been alive, okay? So I'm not surprised. I don't think many people are surprised. There's been a lot of speculation that Seth Moulton would challenge Markey because he probably thinks that that seat is the most vulnerable. I don't think anyone would think that Seth Moulton would have a shot at unseating Elizabeth Warren in 5 years. So he's taking a shot. And listen, Seth, I don't know Seth Moulton. I've never met him. I'm not really a fan, quite frankly. We disagree a lot on policy. He might not be as far left as Markey, which is going to hurt him, but he's still way left of me and left of where he should be, in my opinion. You know, for example, he wouldn't even support protecting girls, biological girls, competing against biological boys in a bill that was presented, even though at one point he was criticized by the far left in his party because he said he didn't want his girls as a father being run over in the field by biological boys. Now, that's certainly a reasonable thing to say. I'm a father of girls, so I get it. But then he sort of, because of that criticism from the far left in his policy, he hem and hawed a bit. And when it came time to prove that he felt that way, he chose not to. Again, we're talking politics. We're talking about politic opportunism, and that's Seth Moulton. Listen, Seth is ambitious. He ran for president last time. He was like one of the quickest people out of the race, but he certainly is an ambitious individual. He even challenged Nancy Pelosi and her leadership. His claim is that the old folks in the Democratic Party, the Nancy Pelosi's, the Chuck Schumers, the Ed Markeys, need to retire go away so that younger Democrats like him and others can take control. Now, it's ironic, though. Seth, in his announcement video, he really just said the same playbook as what Markey's saying, as what all the Democrats saying. And that is, he claims that they're not fighting Trump enough, that they're not fighting the federal government enough, and that he needs to get in there because he'll fight Trump more. He's saying that in an announcement video in the middle of a government shutdown that the Democrats have held the American economy hostage and not voted for a continuing resolution, which is a very clean resolution. I mean, Chuck Schumer voted for the continuing resolution, the same one, which actually just keeps the Biden payments going forward, basically. And they voted no, even though they keep voting yes for 13 times. They voted no this time because they don't like the terms of the Big Beautiful Bill. I've discussed it. The Big Beautiful Bill is certainly not a perfect bill, but that's usually not how our government works. That's for sure. But the point right now, and we'll get to that in a minute, but the point here is that Seth Moulton's claim of why Democratic voters should elect him is because he's younger, basically, is what he's saying, and that he'll fight Trump harder. Listen, President Trump has got 2 more years, essentially, in office. And then he's going to go away. Okay? Yes, does he have 2028 hats, and does he like to poke the bear and say things that get the Democrats and the media to lose their mind that maybe he'll run a third term? He's not going to run for a third term. I mean, Donald Trump's 80 years old. Okay? Now, maybe I'd challenge what I'm saying if he was 60, but he's not. And so Trump's going to be gone in 2 years. So what's your vision, man? Your vision is, we got to fight Trump. We got to fight Trump. We got to fight Trump. That's not a vision. That's basically saying that you're going to engage in constant gridlock for the next 2 years. But when Trump's gone, what are you going to do then? You know, Massachusetts can't just succeed the union and pretend to be its own country and not be engaged with the federal government. We send so many tax dollars to the federal government, and we don't get back what we send in. So we need some cooperation. We need people to get into elected office who will work, not just fight against people, but fight for people. And that is absolutely missing in Seth Moulton's announcement video. It's missing in the already elected leaders like Markey. All they do is stand against other things, complain and hate the federal government and hate Trump. Listen, everybody listening to this radio knows I'm not a big Trump guy, but my God, how about fighting for people? How about fighting for things? How about fighting for issues? Instead of just saying, I'm against. And so I found that to be a glaring omission in Seth Moulton's announcement. Now, Seth is trying to cash in on this generational divide. And you see this happening. You see it in the Maine Senate race that's going on, where you have younger, more progressive Democrats saying that the old Democrat guard is out of the question. But I got to tell you, Seth Moulton isn't part of that left progressive. He's not left enough. And I think that's going to play out. Listen, when the poll came out in February of 2025 that showed that I had potentially could beat Ed Markey in a head-to-head Senate race, the Democrats did a poll. Now, they didn't publish it, so I can't analyze the methodology and all that, but they did a poll. It was reported on internally amongst Democratic primary voters. Now, I know there's some polling out there of general voters, and I think that Seth Moulton would win against Markey if it was a general election, just like I think I will beat Ed Markey if I were to get in a general election. But in a Democratic primary, where you have the more activist, more progressive members of the Democratic Party, that's a different animal entirely. And that internal Democratic primary poll that listed every congressperson in Massachusetts, all 9, against Markey. Now I'm talking about Auchincloss and Lori Trahan and Seth Moulton, Ayanna Presley, and the others. Guess who was the only one to beat Markey in that Democratic primary poll? Ayanna Presley. That's right, Ayanna Presley. That's how left you got to be in a Democratic primary here in Massachusetts. And so, with that said, I can tell you there's a lot of people that are now on the lookout. Will Ayanna Presley jump in the race? Will there actually be not Seth Moulton versus Markey, but Seth Moulton, Ayanna Presley, and Markey in a 3-way race? That's a very different race. Listen, Moulton versus Markey, in my opinion, will not be the same as when Joe Kennedy challenged Markey 5 years ago. Listen, Joe Kennedy was a terrible candidate, and I think he was just resting on his name, right? A Kennedy in Massachusetts, and he couldn't win against Markey. Markey blew him out by 10 points. And I do think Seth Moulton would do much better than that. I think he would certainly cut that lead in half. But one-on-one, I would think that Markey, and a lot of political experts believe this, would edge Seth Moulton out. And if you look at the reaction of many in the Democratic Party at Seth Moulton's announcement, you could see why. Okay, and so I think Seth loses in one-on-one. But what about if Presley gets in the race? Now, that changes the dynamic entirely. We're going to continue this conversation when I come back from the break. You're listening to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. You can reach the show at john@hardtruthshow.com. This is iHeart's WRKO, The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. Don't touch the dial. Don't change the channel. We're going to continue this conversation when we get back. Thank you. All right, everybody, welcome back to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. Thank you so much for listening. Before we took the break, we were talking about, will Ayanna Presley get in the Democratic primary, and how does that change the dynamic? Well, like I said, there was reporting of an internal poll of Democratic primary voters that showed that only Ayanna Presley could beat Markey. Now, I don't know what's going to happen. We don't even know if Ayanna Presley's going to get in the race. If she does, there's a lot of people who think that the far left activists of the Democratic primary party, that they would go and they would support Ayanna Presley because she is the leftist of left. Listen, I didn't think really you could get more left than Ed Markey, if you want me to be blunt. I don't really think Ed Markey's necessarily that left, but he says those things in order to stay elected. All right? Just as a reminder of what I'm saying, Ed Markey supported a constitutional amendment to ban abortions when he was a congressman. Only when he decided to run for statewide office in Massachusetts, he looked at the polling and he saw that if he wanted to be elected in Massachusetts with over 70, somewhere between 70 and 80% of people in Massachusetts believe, up until a certain point, that a woman has a right to choose. Okay, now they also, 70, 80% don't believe in late-term abortions. Okay, I certainly don't believe in late-term abortions. However, up until a certain point, Markey said, you know what, I'm going to be pro-choice. And he ran for Senate, and ever since, he's been, Mr. Pro-choice, even though he supported a constitutional amendment. All right, listen, he was part of the fossil fuel industry. He got donations from fossil fuel companies, the Chevrons and Standard Oil, all those type of companies. But he started seeing he was vulnerable, so he latched on to this young, upcoming congresswoman by the name of AOC, who was talking about climate change. And so Ed Markey said, hey, I'll be the co-sponsor of that bill. And he latched on to that enthusiasm and became Mr. Green New Deal, even though he didn't have the moral courage to vote for it himself. All right, just think about that. Ed Markey is the co-sponsor, author of the Green New Deal. It comes up for a vote, and that man doesn't have the political courage, the intestinal fortitude to vote for his own bill because he knows it's a scam. He knows that it'll never happen, right? But it's a talking point. It's a talking point that appeals to the far left members of his party. But Ayanna Pressley, now we're talking to a new level, all right? Some would argue that she's more borderline, not socialist, communist. And she's going to be even more of a progressive, and she's younger. So some people believe that the moderates will split between Seth Moulton and her, and this is the interesting dynamic. You never know if it's a three-way race. I think Markey beats Moulton one-on-one, 2 or 3 points, in my opinion. Ayanna Pressley gets in a race. Markey might not be second. I mean, the moderates might go to Moulton, and the progressives go to Presley. So it'll be very interesting. I'm fascinated to find out if there's going to be a three-way race in the Democratic primary for United States Senator, which could give a huge advantage to the Republicans, okay? Imagine this. I want everybody to just imagine this for a moment. Imagine a Republican candidate who people get behind in the party, and they decide, you know what, we're going to get behind this candidate from the outset. And that candidate could run a general election campaign from day one, not have to go to 100 RTCs, that's Republican Town Committee meetings. Sometimes there's 4 people there, sometimes there's 40. But if the Republicans came together, the Republicans, the conservatives, unenrolled, who lean a little right or center right, if they all came together, supported a candidate while the Democrats are beating each other up, and trust me, in that Democratic primary, you're going to see some of the most far-left ideology that you've ever seen. It's going to be the following, people. Mark my words. It's going to be open borders. It's going to be amnesty and citizenship for all 20 million illegals. It's going to be biological men can compete against women. It's going to be all of these alternative energy mandates. They say they are concerned about the environment, but they're going to push offshore wind, which absolutely impacts our environment and our oceans and our fishing industry. But they're going to support it, right? They're going to no gas stoves. It's going to be crazy, and it's going to be tax. Because remember, that's their solution to everything, right? Candy tax, prescription tax, millionaires tax, a new car tax on the car tax. I mean, it's crazy. And you're going to see them go so far left. And if the Republicans can come together, get behind a candidate, and that candidate is someone who appeals to unenrolled voters, independents, and even disenfranchised Democrats, and that person faces Ed Markey or Ayanna Pressley, for example, Republicans could win, and history could be made. And so, you know, I've been contacted several times by the media. You know, Deaton, how's this impact your decision with Seth Moulton getting in the race? Well, I can tell you it does not dissuade me. It doesn't discourage me in any way, but we'll see. You know, I haven't officially decided. I am talking to people. I'm seeing if there is a team that I can assemble that could actually win. I'm not getting in this race unless and when I say I mean we, unless we can win a seat. I'm not interested in just winning the primary. I did that last time, and I won it big. I won it by 65% with 2 other people on the ballot. That doesn't interest me at all. Okay, what interests me is giving Massachusetts a voice in the United States Senate. And we don't have a voice. I got over 40%. I got over 1.3 million people who voted for me. And we don't have a single voice in Washington that represents common sense, that represents working people, that represents taxpayers, that represents transparency, that represents term limits, that represents single issue bills, things that are common sense. And so it'll be very, very interesting because I can tell you what the Democrats are doing. You want to know why Elizabeth Warren, Lori Trahan, and others immediately supported Ed Markey? I can tell you right now, you don't have to be a political genius to figure this out. They want Ed Markey to win. They want Maura Healey to win. They assume Maura Healey's going to win. They assume Ed Markey is going to win. Ed Markey, at 80 years old, just before around the 4-year term, 4 years, it's a 6-year term, Ed Markey decides to retire and resign. Well, guess what happens when you have a United States sitting senator resign or die? The sitting governor of that state will then pick someone to fill that seat until you can have a special election. Remember, that's how Scott Brown won. There was a special election and everything, because of Ted Kennedy had passed away. Well, Ed Markey decides to retire, and if it's Maura Healey, you want to know who she's going to pick? She's going to appoint Michelle Wu, Elizabeth Warren's protege. And you can bet your butt Elizabeth Warren wants to see Michelle Wu on the other side of the Senate seat in Massachusetts. That's what the Democrats do. They coronate. They pick how they're going to stay in control. And so, Seth Moulton is trying to throw a monkey wrench in that, and certainly a Republican candidate can throw a monkey wrench in that, and the people can decide. That's how it's supposed to be. The Democrats are always saving democracy by sacrificing democracy and coronating. They tried to coronate Hillary Clinton. They tried to coronate Kamala Harris. And here in Massachusetts, trust me, that's going to be the plan. So I'm excited. I hope that I get confidence in the team that I can assemble. And if I am confident in the team that I can assemble, then maybe I'll run again, because I really believe that we have a shot at making real progress, not just in the Senate race, in the governor's race. I think last week, I played the announcement video for Mike Minogue. And I've had Brian Shortsleeve on here, and I've had Mike Keneally on here, and I'll certainly invite Mr. Mike Minogue, on here to talk about his vision. And so I believe there's a real good chance that the governor's race can be won. I believe the Senate seat can be won. I believe that state Senate and state rep seats can be won. And so it's an exciting time. We've been under this one-party rule for so long. I know many of you are depressed about it, but where change begins? It doesn't begin by winning an election. Change begins by believing that you can win in an election. That's when real change. So if you believe, we can make this happen. You listen to The Hard Truth. Come right back. Welcome back to the show. You're listening to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. You can reach the show at john@hardtruthshow.com. John@hardtruthshow.com. I'm hoping next week to highlight some individuals, independent journalism. I've brought this topic up many times, and I'm going to give you an example of why independent journalism is so necessary and so important in today's world, especially in today's politics. We just witnessed, in my opinion, one of the greatest attempts at gaslighting that we have ever witnessed here in the Commonwealth. And it pertains to our sitting governor, Maura Healey. Now, some of you are aware, and there's even video of this, and Mass Fiscal Alliance has been great online sharing this stuff. And I'm going to share one of their posts on X and videos here in a second. But let's just remember, Maura Healey, she believes in this net zero mandate by 2050, which we'll talk about in a minute. It's insane, right? Like Massachusetts is going to solve climate change by itself. Our little commonwealth, 7 million people, we're going to solve climate change by mandating net zero, punishing all of our taxpayers, punishing all our small businesses, sending jobs not just overseas, but to other states because businesses can't comply with this nonsense. We don't even have the infrastructure in place to comply with this nonsense. Okay, now I say nonsense. I'm not talking about climate change. Climate change is a real thing. I think being able to afford your rent and your groceries is more of an existential threat to you right now than climate change, but it's real. I'm talking about this unreasonable mandates of net zero by 2050. Well, Governor Healey, when she's Attorney General, she was up there bragging about how she's going to stop all these new gas pipelines. No more new natural gas pipelines. They want to expand it, right? Which will help with our energy costs. And she wasn't having it. Well, now when people are experiencing skyrocketing energy prices in many ways due to these alternative energy mandates. I mean, just look at your bill and you'll see supply, $80, delivery charge, $390 or something crazy. And then when you look at delivery charge, you see offshore surcharge, solar surcharge, and whatnot. Well, Governor Healey, facing an election that we just talked about in the last segment, all of a sudden she's changing her tune and she's just scratching her head like she doesn't understand why Massachusetts citizens are experiencing energy costs 70% above the national average. So let me play for you what I describe as one of the greatest gaslighting attempts in modern political history, okay? Let's check this out.
I've been about bringing more gas supply into Massachusetts. I never stopped pipelines.
Remember, I stopped 2 gas pipelines from coming into this state.
In terms of gas, I think I've been pretty clear and consistent about this. I have advocated for the expansion.
And also to oppose new gas infrastructure in this state. We absolutely need to do that.
Okay, when she says, I never stopped any natural gas pipelines, that's this year. When you heard her bragging that she prevented new gas lines, that was in 2022. So when she says things today that are completely opposite of what she said, she literally is trying to rewrite history. But listen, she's a typical politician. You know that she's likely lying whenever her lips are moving. So, you could just chalk it up to, my God, these politicians are liars. They'll say anything to get elected. They'll say anything that no matter how directly contradictory it is to something they said the previous day, we could chalk that up. My question and my issue is when she stands up on that podium in front of all the reporters Beacon Hill. And she says, quote, I never stopped any new gas lines. How in the world does not somebody raise their hand and say, Governor, that's simply not true? Governor, just 3 years ago, as Attorney General, you bragged. You were on stage bragging about stopping new natural gas pipelines. And now you're going to say that you didn't and call her out on it. Like, I just don't understand that. Why? Why would they give the governor a pass like that? It's insane. You know, if I run for office and I say something that is an absolute contradiction of something I've said before, you think they're going to bring it up to me? You think they're going to ask me, hey, John, how the heck can you reconcile that, man? But not her. It is mind-boggling to me. And it's sad and it's pathetic because people are suffering. You realize that people in the Commonwealth right now are choosing between medicine, their electric bill, groceries. And they're like, well, you know, my out-of-pocket expense for my monthly medication, but I can't afford that, and the skyrocketing grocery bill and the skyrocketing electric bill. So it is crazy. I've talked to developers. We have a housing crisis. We need a couple 100,000 new homes for sure, and we need them today. Okay, which has been exacerbated, of course, by the illegal migrant crisis that's been mishandled, obviously, by Governor Healy. And it takes 2 years for builders to even pull the permits. So imagine that. We got a housing crisis, an affordable housing crisis, but it takes 2 years to pull the permits. It's insanity. But on top of that, I've talked to low-income builders, people in Fall River, New Bedford, other areas, and they're like, well, John, you know, we could build government housing, you know, that is Section 8, welfare, and whatnot for low-income folks, but in order to do it, we can't tap into natural gas. We have to build all electric units. And if we do that, we can't charge enough rent if we include utilities because the electric bills are going to make it unaffordable. And if we keep electric outside and make the tenant pay, they can't pay it. And so we're in court trying to evict everyone because they can't afford their electric bill. And he said, so guess what? We just don't build. It's not economically feasible, John. And so that's the state that we're in right now. And Maura Healey is up there saying all this nonsense and untruths, lying. Let's call it what it is, lying. And no one calls her out. Now, the only people calling her out are independent journalists. You know, Jessica Machado that I've had on this station. I have invited John Gately, Jack, to come on this show. He's out there calling it out. Mark Urban's out there calling it out, and others. I apologize for missing some of them out there, but those are the names that jump out at the top of my head. I didn't write anything down, but we're going to highlight them because what they're doing is at least trying to hold these leaders accountable for their actions, accountable for their words. And shame on anyone that was in the press corps. I don't care if it pisses you off. I don't care if you're going to come after me for saying this. I'm going to stand by what I say. Shame on you for not calling Governor Healey out and sitting there and letting her simply lie through her teeth and not even question her, okay? And listen, we're in the middle of a shutdown, and we've got to deal with two major issues in this country. One of them is energy prices, and the other is healthcare. I'll talk about healthcare in the next segment, but energy prices, if you look at this AI boom that we're in, artificial intelligence boom, the amount of electricity that is needed for artificial intelligence is unbelievable. They used to complain about Bitcoin mining using electricity. I mean, the data centers that are needed, they're talking about $500 billion a year. That's $500 billion a year needs to be invested by Microsoft or OpenAI or Elon Musk's Grok and XAI or Anthropic and all these artificial intelligence companies. This race for AI, it requires these data centers. And wherever these data centers are, the amount of electricity they're taking from the grid is going to rise the prices of regular people, right? Because there's going to be so much consumption to power the data centers for artificial intelligence, you're going to have a problem. And that's going to skyrocket even more our electric prices. And it's not that difficult to figure out, people. It's called common sense. We have to expand natural gas here in the Commonwealth, not ban it. We eliminate this. No, we got to say no to this offshore wind nonsense that I've talked about before. We've got to utilize nuclear. All right? I don't understand these people. Nuclear is an absolute viable way. These small modular reactors are incredible. They can power 300,000 homes and take no more than a couple acres of land, unlike solar and wind. You listen to The Hard Truth. Come back. Welcome back to the show. You listen to The Hard Truth. I'm John Deaton. You can reach me at john@hardtruthshow.com, john@hardtruthshow.com. All right, the last segment, we're talking about this Massachusetts nonsense. We have to end the net zero mandate that has been set by 2050. We don't have the infrastructure. The grid will collapse. We've got to implement nuclear. Like I said, these small modular reactors, they're actually built off-site in parts, almost like think of a fabricated home, a manufactured home that can be built in a factory and then brought. These are not like the Three River Island kind of massive nuclear sites that take 10 years. We could put like 4 to 8 of these small SMRs geographically in certain locations across the Commonwealth. And we could actually have nuclear, these SMRs, they're carbon free, man. And they're efficient. And they run at 95%. Okay? That's incredible. And we could get, for sure, 40% of our electricity and power could be produced by nuclear if we do it the right way. So, of course, we implement solar. But just so you know, solar is fantastic, man. I got solar panels on my house, all right, unlike Ed Markey, by the way, the co-author of the Green New Deal. Oh, by the way, I drive a fully electric vehicle, unlike Ed Markey, the co-author of the Green New Deal. Talk about hypocrisy. But a solar is fantastic in certain parts of the land where you could have a field, but solar farms take up massive amount of land. Offshore wind takes up the construction and the damage to the ocean and our fishing industry. So we can do some hydro. We can even come from Canada through the Berkshires potentially and help Western Mass with some limited nuclear sites, with these SMRs, expand natural gas. So there is a way, a multifaceted, common sense energy transition plan. But you've got these politicians like Ed Markey and AOC and Aina Presley and all of them just say, oh, offshore wind, as that's the solution. And solar, that's the solution. It can be part of the solution. Okay, so if they need to stop talking this nonsense, and the last thing I'll say about this is Massachusetts has this net zero mandate by 2050. I want to ask the Governor Healy, what about China? What's your plan for China, Governor? Governor, you know that climate change is a global issue, right? It's not limited to Massachusetts. You do know that, right, Governor Healy? Oh, by the way, Governor Healy, Ed Markey, let me ask you this. You are aware that Massachusetts' entire annual, that means yearly, people, our yearly carbon emissions equals less than 2 days in China. Our yearly carbon footprint is less than 2 full days in China. So when I ask, what are you doing about China? I'm not being facetious, okay? I'm making the point that you don't punish our businesses and our citizens, unfairly punish them, our taxpayers, to solve a global problem. You implement common sense. And the final thing I'll say is that their plan actually is stupid. And the reason I say that is because it does not reduce our dependency on fossil fuels. It actually prolongs our dependency on fossil fuels because sometimes the wind doesn't blow. Sometimes the sun doesn't shine. And if you're taking natural gas out of the equation, you're going to have these massive gaps, especially at peak hours, where the alternative energies can't maintain the demand. And when you have these gaps in energy, how do they get fulfilled? They get fulfilled by coal. They get fulfilled by natural gas. But oftentimes coal, the dirtiest of all. And so you're not getting us off fossil fuels. You're prolonging the dependency because you refuse to inject common sense. When you sit down and you think about these, you just want to get elected and you want to say things that sound nice, right? The Green New Deal, all right? You want to say these buzzwords that's music to the ears to certain elements within your party. It's nonsense. That's why if I do run again, one of my themes, okay, is people before party. Truth over politics. That's what it's got to be about, because I got news for everyone out there. I've talked to people. People are struggling, man. And they're not asking for ideology. They're asking for solutions. Why do you think socialism is on the rise? Why do you think Mandami is out there? I've talked about this before because they need solutions. And if you can't afford your groceries and some charming, guy comes along or gal and says, hey, I can get you free groceries or free transportation or at least your groceries at a reduced cost. I can control your rent. I can reduce your rent. People want to hear that because they need solutions. Okay, we've got to deal with the healthcare issue. I talked about energy. All right, I got to get through this because I'm running out of time. I had a lot to talk to you about this week. This government shutdown, who's going to win? I don't know. The Democrats think that they're winning. The Republicans think that they're winning. I can tell you who's not winning. American people are not winning. And the Democrats, it is their fault. Let me be clear. Okay, there was an election. You don't like the big, beautiful bill. You don't like the cuts in the credits. I get it. I have issues myself, but you don't shut the government down to try to negate the election. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to say, unless you take out what you put in the big, beautiful bill and extend these Obamacare tax credits, we're going to shut the government down. That's just not how you do it. You don't try to nullify an election by holding the American economy hostage. And that's what they're doing. And it's terrible precedent because guess what? when the Democrats are in control one day and they have the House and the Senate, well, Republicans can turn around and say, well, we just don't like the result of the election. We don't like your bill, so we're going to shut the government down unless you change your mind. All right? It's just not the way it's supposed to work. Now, the one thing we've learned is that the Affordable Care Act is not affordable. And it really has never been affordable. It's always had to rely on government subsidies. Now, the Democrats are pushing for those subsidies. And I got to tell you, I got a lot of criticism for Republicans on this. Healthcare is a serious problem. And the Republicans, all they're doing, in my opinion, is saying, told you Obamacare was a bad idea. I told you. I told you the Affordable Care Act wasn't going to be affordable. But they're not offering a solution. You got to offer a solution, man. Listen, here in America, taxpayers guarantee student loans for college. We guarantee housing, Fannie Mae, for example, small business loans through the SBA. But if you can't afford your health care, we're going to let you die? Like, you can't have that approach. And you can't just say, well, taxpayers shouldn't play any role. We play a role in almost everything. So we've got to deal with this. Listen, I encourage all of you out there to Google the Gilded Age, because I believe that the Gilded Age is now the modern age. The Gilded Age was rampant with corruption. You had political corruption. A wealth gap was just so bad. You had these governments, these companies that had monopolies, like Standard Oil, the railroad, the Rothschilds, and the Rockefellers. And along came a Republican by the name of Teddy Roosevelt, and he engaged in what's called the square deal, okay? And we've been living in the corruption era, insider trading, the Clinton Foundation, she's Secretary of State, receiving donations from foreigners. Dick Cheney gives a no-bid contract to Halliburton. We're seeing that in Massachusetts with the service stations, or they won't do an audit. We live in the corruption era, and we need a bold Republican like Teddy Roosevelt to come in and say, I'm going to save capitalism, because I see that socialism is on the rise, just like it was in the Gilded Age. And he brought down these monopolies. He bust the trust of the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds, and small businesses were able to thrive, and competition and real capitalism took hold. And I believe Teddy Roosevelt actually saved capitalism. Now, we can break up the 3 PBMs. They have 90% of the prescriptions in this country. We can ban the secret rebates and the kickbacks. We can make Medicare negotiate for all drugs, not just a few drugs. Think about it. Medicare is the #1 client for Big Pharma. Well, guess what? Medicare should be able to negotiate all of those drugs. How about price transparency? We can do that, making that the Big Pharma has to produce all of the prices. We can shop a microwave. We can look at multiple websites and all the different costs, but we can't shop for insulin. We can't shop for blood pressure or blood thinner or whatever other pharmacy. We need to protect the independent pharmacies in places like Dorchester and Roxbury. We got to stop them from owning insurance companies and everything else. You're listening to The Hard Truth. See you next week.
You're listening to The Hard Truth with John Deaton. John Deaton is a Marine veteran, lawyer, and best-selling author who stared down poverty, survived street violence, and beat cancer to fight another day. From the streets to the courtroom, Deaton has taken on corporate greed and fought against government fraud and overreach. Always for the little guy, a proud father of 3 girls, Deaton brings you the raw, unfiltered truth that hits hard and holds nothing back. Join us as we dive into his journey, his vision, and what he hopes to bring to the people of Massachusetts.